lot of protests and angry voices over what's happening or what is not happening doon sa Senado with regard to the impeachment. Pero ang tanong ng marami siyempre kasi it's with the Senate now eh. What like it or not, we're just the captive audience now. What's the recourse here? What is the legal recourse here?
And is there a legal recourse if they decide not to convene?
Attorney, kahit hindi dinedeny ng Senate President ito lumabas na mga papeles tungkol dito, resolution, no? Parang ang essence ng resolution, parang pwedeng i-deny, pwedeng i-reject ng Senate as Senate itong impeachment. So ano bang ganyan? Ano bang may ganyan ba talaga legal basis yan?
Pwede ba yun?
Well, una, dahil nga doon sa mga declarations coming from the Senate recently, particularly yung naging posisyon ni Majority Leader Francis Tolentino na kapag tumawid na into the 20th Congress, the Senate essentially loses its jurisdiction over yung filed impeachment complaint and it has to be refiled. Ano yun very very troubling yung mga ganung mga perspectives kasi kung titingnan natin yung paano tayo umabot sa puntong ito, hindi naman as if pinail to kahapon tapos wala nang oras di ba? Pinail ito December sa House of Representatives, sinampa nila yung articles of impeachment in February, and then for 4 months walang ginawa ang Senado. So to a certain extent, self-created yung crisis that the Senate is now claiming it is facing in terms of yung time remaining. Yung question remains, kung ang tingin pala nyo, dapat tapusin nyo within this term yung impeachment trial, otherwise hindi na ito tatawid sa 20th Congress, bakit nyo inupuan ng napakatagal? Why did you not have yung sense of urgency na yan when it was first filed? Why did you waste so much time saying na, hindi, merong campaign period, walang pupunta dito, meron kami mga kailangan ipasang ibang batas, and so on and so forth. Kasi yun and that's troubling kasi ang lumalabas dito, kung gusto pala ng Senado, all they need to do is, hindi nila isa-schedule yung trial, they will let the time lapse until yung term mag-expire, and then they will say, sorry, ubos na oras, kailangan i-refile na nyo sa susunod na Kongreso, which actually defeats the whole point of the impeachment process. Kaya nga very, very clear dun sa impeachment rules natin currently under Article 11 of the Constitution na may mga time frames may mga time periods. And then when the House actually files, ang word na ginagamit, forthwith. Hindi ko maintindihan anong mahirap intindihin doon. Any dictionary will tell you ang ibig sabihin doon immediately, agad-agad. And very basic rule naman of statutory construction, interpretation ng constitutional provisions ay the ordinary meaning is the meaning that is used. So, nakakalukuhan na tayo dito di ba? Parang inupuan, obvious naman na dinelay. And then if this will be allowed, it will set a terrible precedent for all future impeachments. Kung papayagan yung Senado na pwede palang ubusin nila ang oras, and then they will just claim, sorry, next Congress na ito, and we can hindi automatic na mag-refile, then they can effectively kill impeachments simply by doing nothing. So, mas malaki na yung issue dito kaysa doon sa issue ni VP Sara Duterte mismo, who ironically, actually, is one of the people who wants to actually have the trial at this point. So, ano yung recourse available? Well, actually, pwede ka mag-file ng mandamus, di ba, before the Supreme Court. And kung totoo na maglalabas sila ng resolution, supposedly creating invento na namang term to, de facto dismissal, pwedeng questionin yon before the Supreme Court. Ang problema mo lang, obviously, before the Supreme Court can actually rule on the matter, malamang sa malamang, umabot na tayo sa 20th Congress, in which case, iba na yung issue na pinag-uusapan.
Nakalagay kasi doon sa non-existent na resolution, yung de facto dismissal. Non-existent dahil walang gusto
So
mag-claim.
we just made up that term. Pero
De facto
actually,
dismissal.
that's a good point, attorney. No, yung rule to proceed forthwith with trial is meant to protect both the accuser and the accused, because it gives the accused a right to a speedy trial, which is a right that's enshrined in the Constitution. Marami nakalimot na siguro noon that it also it's a chance for her to present evidence to deny all the claims, as she has done this entire time, right? Pero
Yes.
if hindi nga sila mag-convene as an impeachment court, counter to what the Constitution calls for, what happens then? What's the scenario that we're looking at here? We're going to may great crisis in the Senate then.
Pwede bang kasuhan yung mga senador, attorney, or sa balota lang ang hatol sa kanila? Pwede ba silang kasuhan dyan na hindi nila ginawa yung kanilang function? Meron bang kahit wala pang president?
Well, I'm sure, siguradong kapag hindi kumilos dyan, somebody will bring it to the Supreme Court. Una, meron ng pending na kaso si VP Sara Duterte. So that can actually be discussed by the court in the context of that pending case. Pangalawa, if the Senate actually passes the non-existent de facto dismissal resolution, I'm sure mayroong magpa-file din dyan sa Korte Suprema to question the constitutionality of such a move. Kasi kahit nabasahin mo yung buong Article 11, which talks about impeachment, walang nakalagay doon na may option ng Senate to dismiss an impeachment complaint.
Yes.
Di ba? Klaro that the only mandatory duty they have as an impeachment tribunal is to convene and hold the trial once yung articles of impeachment are forwarded, and then in that trial, tama si Ronald, either vote to acquit or to convict. Yun lang. Walang dismissal dito na pinag-uusapan. So actually hindi ko alam kung ano ang magiging constitutional basis nila for this. And then sabihin mo nang maipasa yan, tumawid na tayo, July, next Congress na, and then they will say, kasi mukhang ang posisyon yata ni Senate President Escudero ngayon ay the plenary is supreme. Na parang kung ano desisyon nila, yun ang masusunod. Superior sila to the Constitution, in effect. Pag nangyari yun, I'm sure somebody will bring it to the Supreme Court and magkakaroon tayo ng ruling on whether or not yung impeachment complaint can actually cross over to the next Congress. Pero ako, babalikan ko lang yung punto ko kanina na hindi na tayo dapat umabot sa point na ito Kung at the beginning, yan pala ang kanilang pananaw. I mean, honest to goodness, ang tingin talaga nila, dapat within the same Congress ma-resolve ang impeachment complaint. Ang hindi ko maintindihan, bakit wala silang ginawa? Parang ano yan meron kang project na isasubmit para sa klase mo, alam mo na may deadline, tapos pepetix ka ng ilang buwan, tapos pagdating ng deadline, deadline pala, sorry, hindi na namin masasubmit, hindi na namin mahahabol. Parang ano talaga, yun yung para sa akin, napaka troublesome, di ba? At napaka-suspicious dito sa nangyaring ito. Dahil clearly, kung ganyan ang kanilang pananaw at ganyan ang kanilang ginawa, they had every intention to avoid an impeachment trial, which is contrary to kung ano yung sinasabi ng ating konstitusyon. So, may malinaw talagang paglabag na nangyari dito.
Attorney, yung non-existent resolution, ang ini-invoke na violate daw yung right to speedy trial ng accused. May basis ba yun? Kasi di ba meron nasa Bill of Rights naman yung speedy trial, kaya lang, pwede mo ba yung ini-invoke in that circumstance?
Unang-una, yung right to speedy trial, kung na-violate man, sino may kasalanan? Hindi ba sila rin? So punto, kung tingin pala nila, meron palang dapat pala na-resolve to kaagad. Di dapat, kundi na sila noong February. Parang ridiculous talaga sa akin yung sitwasyon na they will now make all sorts of claims na violate ang right to speedy trial, hindi naman continuing bloody ang Senate, therefore dapat natapos dito. Na kung totoo pala yan, di dapat inasikaso na nyo habang maaga pa. You had all the time in the world to do it. You had more than 4 months bago pa umabot sa June para gawin yan. And according dun sa timeline na pinrovide ni Senate President Escudero a few months ago. Kung nagsimula sila ng June, dapat within 4 or 5 months tapos na sila. So kung sinimulan pala na dito noong February, edi tapos na. Wala na sanang need to actually look at all these provisions and then use them as excuses as to why we cannot proceed with yung trial. Self-created ito eh. Self-created na problema. Sila mismo ang gumawa ng problema. Ngayon, naghahanap sila ng kung anong dahilan para gawing excuse yung problema na iyon.
Kasalanan niya ng Paris Fashion Week.
Oo.
Ngayon- ngayon-
Kasi ni-schedule nila right
Ngayon,
now.
Milan Fashion Week.
Okay. Masyadong maraming events.
Balikan ko lang yung tanong. Kung sakasakaling umakit siya sa Supreme Court, meron bang penalty nga sa mga senators? Parang dereliction of duty. Apart from, huwag nyo
Abrogation.
na lang iboto yung mga yan uli. Ganon.
Yun yung
Meron
sinasabi ko
bang
kanina.
sanction in any way?
Meron bang cases na pwedeng i-file?
Wala kasing administrative, direct administrative
Yes.
liability, although yung ombudsman has a
Yes.
broad mandate to actually address any form of illegality or impropriety na ginagawa ng
Dereliction
mga
of
branches.
duty.
So pwede
Diba?
technically na dereliction of duty under the ombudsman, 'di ba? Ang gagawin mo.
Kalimutan na natin. Tapos na boxing.
Technically, pwede silang masuspend, but
Si Ami Pumindol po yun. Si Ami
hindi
Pumindol.
hindi ako sa doon eh. Sa ganun eh.
So-
Kaya nga, this is so... Ako, I personally find it very offensive. Kasi di ba, nilalabag ang konstitusyon, tapos niloloko pa tayo dun sa dahilan, pinapalabas na, hindi, sinusunod lang namin yung rules. Hindi sinunod ang rules eh. Yun yung malinaw eh. Hindi kayo nag-convene agad eh. Yung pa lang.
Pero,
Yun
attorney,
yung original violation eh.
Opo, pero attorney, pero the fact is po, we're already at this point, talagang hindi matatapos itong impeachment na to within the 19th Congress. Sigurado na po yun. I mean, that's still a given ready. The question lang is whether it will cross over talaga to the 20th. Now, my question is,
Yes.
ganito what are your plans? What do you plan to do? Or do you or your colleagues plan to make any filings with the Supreme Court? Sabi nga ninyo, there are possibilities that there are legal recourses for lawyers to pursue to push this forward. Kaya po, meron ba kayong mga balak?
Well, may mga kinausap na ako who are actually already talking about yung intention to actually bring the matter to the Supreme Court. So that's something na kailangan ma-finalize in the next few days. And I think ang magiging trigger point yan is really kung maipapasa itong non-existent resolution. Pag naipasa yun, meron ka na kasing hawak na papel and you
actionable
can
na.
go to the Supreme Court. Yes.
Action ba? In other words, pag i-dismiss ng Senado itong impeachment charges.
May relasyon ba yan, attorney, doon sa sinabi kanina ni Laila de Lima, doon sa press conference nila, na magsasampa sila ng mandamus sa Supreme Court?
Well, hindi ko alam kung
that's an option.
sino kausap ni Senator, ni Congresswoman-elect De Lima. Ako naman salimpusa lang ako sa mga bagay na ito di ba?
So, alam mo na yung Pedro Couto.
Hindi ko pa rin alam Pedro Couto.
Ito pala. Pwede ba, attorney? Pwede bang ipa-disbar yung mga senator? Hindi sila matatanggal na senator, pero pwede ba ipa-disbar?
Galit talaga si Ami.
Kasi,
Yung mga
di ba,
lawyers.
Yung mga lawyers can actually be subject to a disciplinary proceeding, di ba? Which can
Yes.
include a disbarment complaint. Yes.
Si Francis
Yeah.
Tolentino, ang daming kwan yan MMA.
Yun,
Ano yung
abogado
MMA?
yun. Yung mga nag-aaway-aaway doon, yung mga abogado
Marami siya mga masteral.
Masters. But okay.
Yeah.
So the elephant in the room, attorney, seems to be parang it feels like they're doing everything they can to try to avoid having to vote on the impeachment, right?
Yeah.
Because that will be obviously a very public thing. And either way, mababash ka, right? With whichever way you voted, at least that's what people are saying. Is that also the sense that you're getting?
Yes, tingin ko naman talagang ayaw nilang malagay sa posisyon where they have to choose, where they actually have to take a side, where they actually have to stand for something dito sa impeachment. They'd rather sit on the fence until malapit ng 2028 when they can conveniently jump to kung sino man yung tingin nilang magiging paborable sa kanilang personal political interests. Obviously, an impeachment trial will place a spotlight on each individual senator judge. Lalo na pag lumabas na yung aktual na ebidensya, diba? And depending on gaano ka bigat o gaano ka seryoso o gaano ka katiba yung kwentong maipapalabas during the impeachment, that will really put yung mga senators on the spot. Kasi kung halimbawa, ang linaw na meron talagang katiwalian na nangyari, kung alyado ka ni VP Sara Duterte, para namang napakalabo naman na in the face of ganitong klaseng ebidensya ay kikiling ka pa rin sa kanya. Di ba? On the other hand, kung ikaw naman ay malalagay sa pwesto na boboto ka to convict, baka ang takot mo naman ay may balik sa'yo yung mga, doon naman sa level ng mga supporters ni VP Sara. So, they're obviously trying to avoid having to make that decision. Kaya, hindi ba kontento na lang sa let's have the trial and then pumoto tayo the way we want, pero wag na lang tayo magka-trial. Kasi para wag tayong lahat malagay sa alangan, which again, para sa akin is so offensive. Dahil ang nangyayari dito, yung napaka-importanting constitutional process na intended to protect yung mga ordinaryong mamamayan laban sa abuso at the highest levels is now bowing to political expediency and political interest ng mga individual na mga senador na mukhang hindi mahanap yung tapang na pumosisyon sa isang issue tulad dito.
Pero di ba, attorney, hindi naman surprising yon dahil yun naman talaga ang norm.
You do norm, pero that's not right because this is meant to be an apolitical exercise. And you, as a senator, you take an oath, di ba? You take a separate oath as a trial, as a judge, right? That you will vote based, that you will vote merely based on evidence. Right? So,
Kaya
kasi,
masasabi ko, Sec Ronald, di ba, hindi ba ganun naman lagi? Dati pa namang ganyan ang mga senador. Pero in the past, yung mga senador had the decency to hold the trial. Diba? Ngayon naman po, kita ng ganito kalanta.
yun na nga eh. So okay. Because on the other side of it, hindi naman necessarily, we're not taking for granted it's going to be a conviction. What if yung evidence that they have on hand is so weak, di ba?
Exactly.
So we don't know what they're holding. It could be resibo lang na Mary Grace Piatos, whatever. It doesn't connect her directly to the what they're alleging. So for all we know, yun lang yung evidence nila on hand. So it could also benefit the Vice President. So the question is...
But they also have the video of her
Ako kasi,
yung video, on the basis of that video, you can convict
That's
on...
one of the articles of impeachment.
iba kasi yung no namin sa no mo eh.
That's one of the articles of impeachment. Her active threat against the
Yun na yun. Is that
One of
evidence
those.
beyond reasonable
One of
doubt,
those,
though? Or you don't need
Hindi,
that high bar?
sabi niya, hindi niya sinabi yun eh.
Okay. Sabi niya, hindi
Sabi niya, hindi niya sinabi yun.
Nga, she didn't
Hindi
threaten.
sinabi niya it's not a real threat.
Hindi, sinabi rin
It's
niya
a
na hindi niya
conditional
sinabi.
threat.
Nagbago na yung mga sinabi.
Conditional daw, conditional.
Teka, sir,
Tinigilan na yung argumento mo na sinabi
Okay, wait. Sorry.
pag rape threat, lagi may kondisyon.
Sorry, I have to break lang. Senate President Pro Tempore Jingo Estrada confirms the existence of a draft resolution
Oh, yun pala eh.
seeking to
Hindi na
dismiss
non-existent.
Vice President
So, hindi na
Duterte's
siya
impeachment
non-existent. Talaga mga
complaint.
malisyoso.
Sabi ni Senator Jingo, he saw the draft last Monday.
Baka naman also the draft on social
Oh,
media.
dalawa lang yung nagsabi.
Dalawa rin
Ay,
yung sabi.
hindi,
That's
tsaka
Amy
Jingo.
and Jingo.
Ano, tanong mo,
Kung may
tanong mo.
kopya ako ng
Sir.
draft,
Sir, I have a question, sir. Allow me to be maliciously, allow me to be a malicious devil's advocate here. Okay. What if because the administration has seen the numbers so far in the 19th and the 20th Congress and they see little hope of getting a conviction at this point, both in the 19th and the 20th Congress. So what if they're trying to defer action until they can swing public sentiment and the Senate sentiment in favor of conviction? That's one element. The other element is this. What if they're also waiting for the ombudsman to retire, after which they can pursue a criminal case?
Sabi naman nilang wini-wait.
oo nga, sa August na yan, lapit-lapit na nun eh.
Teka lang.
Kasi
Never mind.
Alam mo, tawag dyan, waiting for Godot. Waiting for Godot yan.
Never mind the evidence, no? It doesn't matter. Basta tingnan lang natin kung ano yung numbers natin sa Senado.
Oh, yun naman yun eh. Hindi yan. Kasi, sir, I remember the NBI conducted an investigation into the threats issued by VP Sara And they filed already a complaint with the DOJ, but it's been pending with the DOJ for several months. Hindi gumagalaw for some reason. What if they're just waiting for the appropriate time to elevate it to the ombudsman, which is next month?
Una, let's be clear. Whatever criminal cases can be pursued, whether through the Department of Justice or the Ombudsman, that's a completely different process from yung impeachment. And whether or not the impeachment actually proceeds, whether or not the Senate convicts or acquits, pwedeng magpatuloy independently yung
Yes, sir.
yung criminal
That's true.
cases na yan. So walang ano yun, ibang usapan yun na walang kinalaman ni si Sara dito. The first question that you were raising is, I suppose, more directly related dahil they're looking for numbers, parang ganon. They're
Yes,
looking
sir.
for public support
For
mas madaling
18+1.
mas madaling ma-secure yung conviction. Para sa akin, that's a dangerous game to play. Kasi gaya nga, I said at the outset, this is an issue that has gone beyond whether or not dapat bang makonvict si Sara Duterte o hindi under the articles of impeachment approved by the House of Representatives. This already goes to the core of how to properly conduct a constitutional process of impeachment. And ang worry ko dito kasi, moving forward, if you allow the Senate to do this now,
It's the
future
president.
Senates will now have this tool at their disposal.
Na optional pala, optional pala.
Ayaw nila tanggalin doon, ay uupuan lang nila. At para sa akin, ayun yun yung hindi katanggap-tanggap talaga dito Kasi if you look at yung history of why we have this particular kind of impeachment process in the 1987 Constitution, it's anchored on yung experiences during martial law, na yung mga attempts at impeachment ni nung unang President Marcos ay lahat halos dead in the water sa batasang pambansa. That's why they put in reforms like they reduce yung required number para maakyat ng House to the Senate. Kaya naglagay ng mga periods para hindi pwedeng upuan lang. Kaya sinabing forthwith para malinaw that this is a trial that should proceed immediately and kailangang aksyonan. And if we just brush all that aside and say, hindi, the Senate can say, mas importante sa amin ang magpasa ng mga priority legislation na actually para sa akin, question mark kung talagang ginagawa pa nila. But sige, sabihin na natin, if they can say that, that means that they can just abandon yung constitutional duty and they can set aside every safeguard that is precisely put in place in this Constitution to avoid yung pagprotekta ng Senate sa isang impeachable officer dahil lang aliado nila or dahil lang politically expedient para sa kanila. And para sa akin, yun yung mas mabigat dito regardless of how the impeachment trial actually plays out,
At saka,
kung matutuloy man.
dagdag dyan, attorney, kung sakaling mag-fail itong impeachment na ito, maghihintay ka na naman ng 1 taon para mag-file uli.
Totoo.
At sa 2026, patay na yan dahil ang focus na ng mga politiko is 2028 presidential election. At possibly, after 1 year, baka lame duck na yung presidente para magtulak ng kahit anong impeachment process. At saka yung Congress mo, baka yung 260 na bumoto, baka 60 na lang ang matira, no, na boboto sa impeachment. No? Dahil nga, nanggaling ka sa failure at papunta ka na sa isang bagong eleksyon.
Dali, may anghel naman.
So mukhang may resolution nga.
So alam mo na, si Pedro Cotto.
Okay, attorney, since if there are no more questions on the impeachment, since we have you here, I was wondering if you could talk about yung cabinet revamp na hindi naging revamp.
Parang pakyaw.
Non-revamp.
What
Parang
did
pinakyaw yung
you
tanong,
think?
di ba?
Kasi it's been almost 2 weeks since in-announce, tapos nakatatlong press conference na si E.S. Bersamin, and so far,
Mga presidential assistants lang.
last
Cabinet
kahapon,
retention pala.
Sino yun?
Cabinet retention, hindi revamp.
Sino yun? Sino yun?
So, what did you think? Supposedly,
Well,
bold reset siya,
yeah.
pero...
I agree that it did not live up to yung billing. Kasi Unang-una ganito, every midterm naman, it's expected na magkaroon ng some kind of changes in the cabinet. Every administration has gone through that. Pero this administration made it a point na gawing malaking issue. Diba na, hiningi lahat ang mga resignations ng lahat ng cabinet secretary, lahat ng mga head of agencies. Obviously, with to support a narrative na we're turning a new leaf, diba? Parang talagang
Clean
yung mga
slate.
hindi nagpe-perform, papalitan namin, magpapasok kami ng mga dynamic na mga tao.
Restart.
Dahil nagre-respond kami sa pangangailangan ng tao. And then, yun nga, after all that build-up, wala namang any major
Done.
change. Yung mga tinanggal, nilipat
Done.
sa iba. Except for a few. Tapos yung mga pinasok naman na, while there are some good names there, di ba? Banggitin ko na yung aming dean, si Lelen Berberabe. For the most part, wala namang any groundbreaking, world-altering na talagang
Earth-shaking.
sobrang exciting itong
Hindi bold.
appointment na ito.
Titillating.
So, hindi
Parang iba yun.
hindi nag-live up to the hype. And nakakatawa dito, sila ang gawa ng hype, pero hindi sila nag-deliver on the hype na binild up nila.
Sila gumawa.
Do you there's some talk na all of this was just to ano pa lang sabihin, gently ease out si Souljen Gara because we know what he did, which is that he refused to advocate for the he refused to
Defend.
touch the case.
He refused to defend.
Ibig sabihin, ginawa
Defend
yung lahat,
the government.
Ginawa yung lahat
Nag-refuse
ng
siya.
huli balong na gano'n.
Ang
Para
bull.
lang
Well,
sa...
sabi
OSG.
nila.
Para lang sa... Para lang
Sabi
sa
nila.
I doubt it.
Do you believe that?
I doubt it.
Well, I'll say this, di ba? Kung yun lang pala ang intensyon, napakahina naman nila if they had to go through this entire drama just to do that.
Oo nga, tanggalin mo na lang, ano?
I mean, nag-agree ako kay Ma'am Ami, di ba? There was clear basis to actually remove him when he actually refused to represent the government. And I think everybody would have understood kung he was asked to resign on that basis. Pero yung gagawa ka ng isang malaking production, lahat ng tao papasabit mo ng resignation, para lang siya yung ma-target. Well, para sa akin, kung yun nga yung dahilan, that reflects a level of weakness in leadership na hindi ko pa nakikita in a long, long time sa isang occupant ng Malacanang.
Oh my.
Hindi kaya may pumasok na na intervention kasi pagkatapos nung sinabi ng Malacanang na okay, we admit na the people are unhappy kaya natalo daw yung alyansa, may mga pumasok na mga voices from the house. Sinabi nila, hindi naman totoo ang dami-dami nanalo na administration sa Congress and sa local government. Hindi kaya pumasok yung ganung bakit nyo pagtatanggalin niyang lahat, wala namang basis.
Well, kung doon, sa akin, dapat pumasok yan bago sila nag-announce na maghihingi sila ng ganitong resignation. Kasi magmumukha ka lang, it makes you look weak, ineffectual, and even insincere. Nagagawa ka ng isang malaking production na ganon, and then, ito lang ang resulta. walang na-deliver na any major na pagbabago. So, kung ganun din pala, dapat na pag-usapan nila ng mas matagal. Kung sasabihin natin major reaction to the election, yung ganun, hindi sila dapat siguro nag-react kaagad. Diba? Maybe they should have given it more thought. Because, ako, in the end, tingin ko, it only damages yung credibility nung administration further.
Right.
Because you promise all sorts of sweeping changes, supposedly in response to yung poor performance in the midterms, and you don't really deliver. Even na lang sa level na mag-appoint ka ng mga bagong tao. Diba? Yun yung point. Kasi we're not even talking about kung nag-deliver nga ng aktual na programa at accomplishments yung mga pinasok nila. We're just talking about meron bang pinasok na mga tao na mukhang talagang exciting na appointments na talagang will shake up yung mga opisinang pamumunuan na nila. And even on that level, mukhang kinapos ito. So ako, disappointing, I suppose, is the kindest word to use dito at
And
this point.
especially since yung unang na-retain ay yung buong economic team. And you remember they said when they announced the cabinet reset, they said, we're listening, we hear you. But if they really listened, well, the survey after survey said yung top voters' concerns are economic in nature, right?
Yeah.
Hunger,
Yes.
poverty, jobs, food security. Sabi nga ni Yami kahapon, you pointed out as well na yung PhilHealth fund transfer
Budget.
was a big issue for the elections,
Yes.
right? Yung budget issues. And yet, ang unang na-retain ay yung economic team. So,
And yung Secretary of Health na nakita. Walang indicator actually that there was anything in the changes supposedly na inintroduce in the cabinet that was actually directly responsive to yung mga popular concerns na lumalabas sa mga survey. So ako, kung ganun din pala, dapat di na lang nila binild up. They should not have hyped it as something. Kasi, di ba, hype only works kung kahit paano meron kang proof of concept at some point, di ba? Pero yung i-hype mo, tapos wala, mas lalo pang nakakasama yun para sa isang administrasyon. I will just reiterate yung point na sinabi ko kanina na napakadelikado ng ganyang klaseng precedent that they are setting dito. Kasi ganito na lang So kung halimbawa pala, may impeachable officer tayo na let's say magkukumit ng malalang krimen. Let's say treachery, treason.
Treason.
Diba? Kikiling sa magpapagamit talaga sa ibang bansa, sa dayuhang bansa.
Dayuhang invader.
Diba? Magbibigay ng mga sikreto ng ating national defense sa China, halimbawa. Yun yung So, basta gawin pala yun within the election period just before yung transition ng Congress, wala na magagawa ang Senado. Kasi wala nang oras di ba? Hayaan na lang natin na maupo yan kahit na patuloy na ginagamit niya ang kanyang opisina, di ba? Para mag-transmit ng mga sikreto ng ating bansa sa dayuhang bansa kasi wala na tayong magagawa di ba? Yun yung point. Hintayin na natin ang susunod na kongreso. Napaka niyan na lumalabas. Hindi pala urgent itong usapin na ito. It's at the Senate's convenience and therefore, di ba, it should just give way sa mga iba pang mga concerns sila. Isipin mo, between February and now, it's not as if walang ginawa ang Senado. Naalala ko si Senator Amy Marcos nagkaroon ng ilang hearing di ba? Nagpatawag ng hearing para imbestigahin yung pagkaka-aresto at pag-transfer kay dating Pangulong Duterte sa ICC. So yung pala, mas importante pa yun kaysa sa impeachment na constitutionally mandated na trabaho ng Senado. Diba? They could make time for that but they could not make time for a constitutional duty under Article 11. So ako, ang labo nito. Pangalan, hindi pa rin ako kumbinsido doon sa hindi pwedeng tumawid. Kasi nga, again, same idea. The Senate is supposed to be a continuing body. Diba? Hindi naman yan parang kongreso na yung buong membership na papalitan every 3 years. Madami ng mga desisyon ng ating Korte Suprema na sinasabi na the Senate as an institution is a continuing body. So walang pinag-iba yan sa Supreme Court, for example, na kapag may pending na kaso sa Supreme Court at may nag-retire na justice at may ibang nag-appoint, hindi naman kailangan i-refile yung buong kaso uli, di ba? Dahil nagkaroon ng change in membership Because at the end of the day, it is the continuation and yung continuity ng institution which matters. And supposedly, the Senate is such a body, so they should be able to hear yung ganong klaseng institution. Pero tingnan natin, at this point kasi, nagdi-devolve na into legal technicalities, pero papaalala ko lang na hindi na sana tayo umabot sa puntong ito kung simula pa lang ginawa na nila ang kanilang trabaho. At kung ganyan pala ang pananaw nila mula simula, di sana kumilos na sila habang may oras pa. Hindi inubos ang oras and then gagawing dahilan yung ganyan para wag na lang kilusan itong impeachment complaint na ito.
Prof, may pahabol lang ako isa. Kasi I've also seen this argument going back and forth. One for continuance using Arnold versus Nazareno of 1950. The other one being Balag, I think, versus the Senate of 2019. Yun daw pangontra. What do you think of that? Yung Balag versus the Senate, where supposedly the Supreme Court ruled na everything stops pag nag-adjourn ng Senado.
Una, ang context ng mga desisyon na yan ay with respect to the power
Investigation.
of the Senate to actually issue contempt, contempt orders. And yung contempt orders relate directly to the power of the Senate as a legislative body. So totoo naman yun. When the Supreme Court pronounced na insofar as legislation is concerned, hindi yan tumatawid ng Kongreso, ayun. Kasi kapag mga bills kailangan mong i-refile.
Yeah.
Pero dito ko i-draw yung malinaw na distinction. The power to sit as an impeachment court is not legislative in character. Ibang-iba to, di ba? This is a completely different function na binigay sa Senado not as legislators but as representatives of the Filipino people. Yun yung idea dito. Kaya nga kapag nag-constitute sila as impeachment court, hindi sila nauupo as Senate, di ba? They have to take a new oath as senator judges because it is a new role and a separate function. So hindi yung mga sinasite nilang mga kasong yan, Neri versus Senate, etc. Ang ruling dyan apply to legislative functions ng Senado.
Yeah.
Wala pa tayong court decision on the power of the Senate to actually sit as an impeachment court and whether it could continue. And madami ng mga retired justices, mga former members of the Constitutional Commission na nagpahayag ng kanilang opinion na sa tingin nila, because of the Senate's nature as a continuing body, it should be able to continue to hear an impeachment na nasimulan in a previous Congress. And para sa akin din, as a matter of practicality, self-preservation ng lipunan at proteksyon ng mga mamamayan, hindi ba logical naman yon? Ibig sabihin, kung nagtagal yung trial at umabot ng transition ng Senate, wala na. Tapo na lahat yon. Kailangan mag-reset tayo uli. kahit na meron ng mga ebidensyang na present, kahit na meron ng kailangan mag-reset uli, which is para sa akin absurd and contrary to yung intention and the spirit behind Article 11 of the Constitution.
Wala pang, Attorney, you're correct, wala pang president, pero I consulted this with the UP law, yung mga constitutionalists doon, and they seem to be all in agreement na medyo mali yung interpretation ni Senator Tolentino on the Jefferson's Manual of Parliamentary Practice, which clearly states that the impeachment process is not considered discontinued upon the dissolution of Parliament. Kasi nga quasi-judicial function na to, hindi legislative.
Tama yung lolo ko.
Exactly.
So tama yung lolo mo. Correct.
Lolo mo si Clinton?
Tama yung lolo ko.
Si Clinton.
Hindi, kayo naman si Jefferson.
Yung impeachment ni Clinton, di ba? 105 to 106.
Pero mukhang iba yung pinipili talaga yung ibang interpretation at this point. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. We'll end that there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, former party list representative, Attorney Barry Gutierrez.
Thank you, sir.
Salamat,
Thank
attorney.
you,
It's been a pleasure.
Attorney.
Anytime.